Hello, welcome here at the Sustainable Impact Hub. We are very happy to have today around this table to talk about the new financing models for humanitarian action. Serena Guarnaschelli, partner at Elisabeth. We have Juan Cordeque, head of new financing models at ICRC. And we have Dr. Maximilian Martin, Global Health at Philanthropy at Lombard. Thank you for being here. Maybe you can just present yourself shortly.
With pleasure. Hi, my name is Serena. I'm a partner at Invest, and what I specialize in is what we call and what everybody calls innovative financing. What it means to us, it is the design and structuring of new products. They can be new in terms of the structure, like impact bonds have been, or they can be traditional products that are applied to a new sector, for example, the humanitarian sector, a sector that really requires innovation to face some of the financing challenges. And so our experience in innovating finances is including the partnership with the ICRC and Lombard on the co-structuring of the humanitarian impact bond. And our perspective, maybe briefly, is starting with the social issue, really understanding deeply what are the financing challenges in that issue, and then finding a fit-for-purpose vehicle that can unlock new financing to meet those challenges.
Thank you, Serena.
Right, so Juan Cordeque, 20 years with the ICRC, 17 of those in conflict environments in different places in Africa, Middle East, and the former Soviet Union. Over the past 4 years, I set up and run the corporate partnerships unit at the ICRC with an objective to mobilize the corporate sector in support of ICRC strategic objectives. And now I have a new job in charge of answering the question. The ICRC, together with a number of partners, has done the humanitarian impact bond. What next? Now let me underline this point. I don't have a financial background. Hopefully I have a financial future.
Thank you.
Well, pleasure to be here, first of all, and I would like to second what my colleagues on the panel said. It's a really exciting time for innovation, unfortunately also because we have serious problems to solve. At Lombard, we take a holistic view on philanthropy, and I think if you remember the old adage by Peter Drucker that if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that's exactly what we're not trying to do. We're trying to understand the problems and then ask what kinds of financing instruments, and of course when you speak about classic events, we talk about grants, but there may be other instruments as well where you can actually realize some kind of financial return in different asset classes. And I think when we think about talk about the future of financing in the humanitarian space, it's really important that we first look at the problem. I mean, yes, we all know that there are more refugees than ever since the end of World War II. But if you break it down, about 2/3 of those are internally displaced, 1/3 have fled their country, and then Syrians, for example, from Afghanistan and other countries, and about 3 million are asylum seekers. These populations have very different needs, and our mantra or objective is to say, let's understand these needs in conjunction with partners who actually serve these populations, such as ICRC, and then ask what can we as a group that deeply understands finance and has been committed to responsible investing and philanthropy for more than 200 years, what can we bring to the table to act in partnership in a complementary way to develop new solutions that work in scale.
Thank you very much. So as you were saying, we know that the humanitarian needs cannot be met by the resources currently available, and we hear about digitalization, the emergence of blockchain, impact investing, and all of this offers opportunity for disruptive innovation. So my first question would be, based on your experience of the humanitarian impact bond, what are the lessons learned? And I will begin with Serena, because unfortunately Serena has to run, so she will leave us shortly. So please, Serena, go ahead.
Thank you. So my reflection on I think it was a journey with the ICRC, the impact bond, is that really what you say in terms of what is needed, innovation in financing, yes, but not as a standalone. It needs an innovation in service delivery. This is how we came to work with the ICRC. And by innovation, I don't mean something that is new, like never done before, but really is taking a model that works, thinking about what takes to scale it, and then that's what and apply it, right? And so, and also innovation in technology. And one of the things that Impact Bond, I think, has been able to do is to enable the ICRC to do better what you already do well, including some of the longer term investments that, for example, may not be possible under the traditional model of grants. So let me reflect maybe about some of the things that have also been challenging. Financial innovation, like anything, requires change, and change is not easy. I think our experience has been that the Impact Bond was anchored by a very strong vision about where the ICRC wanted to become in terms of new relationships with investors and partners. Some have been long-standing, like Lombard, some are new. And a real strive towards performance management. Right? So again, do at scale and do better what you've already been doing well. The realization is that as you're in the process of actually setting the commercial product, you experience something that is close to change management, and I think that is a very complex process that requires a lot of focus and a lot of dedication. And I think for the ICRC has been set in place new capabilities in terms of also managing the product. I'll let you maybe discuss some of that. The second reflection is that for me, and what made this different or like a landmark transaction compared to other impact bonds has been the engagement with private investors. I think still social impact bonds, we know they're not nascent anymore. There are more than 108 out there. But sometimes they often involve like foundations, philanthropies, and so on. In the case of the impact bond, it was first a product at scale, 26 million to 43 rehabilitation centers in Africa. So quite substantial financing, maybe small compared to the balance sheet of the ICRC, small but significant in terms of what it enabled to finance. And then the engagement of private investors and donors on both sides of the deal. And we know that public-private partnership can actually be quite complex to achieve. How did it feel for you?
Okay, maybe I want to get this right because I've been working on it for a few days. So let me just say this: new financing models, the way we see it, and this is something we have learned with the humanitarian impact bond, is about the art and science of mobilizing new sources of capital and new partners to respond to unmet or emerging needs in new and collaborative ways. So, as you were saying, it is certainly about change. A number of very specific or more specific lessons learned around the humanitarian impact bond. Number one, we started with the product. That was not right. Again, you need to start with what is it that you want to solve. Okay, that is the starting point. What is it that what is the challenge? What is your objective? What is your change story? Second, very important going forward, is that if you want to do impact investment, you need outcome funders. So it's a good idea to make sure that you have outcome funders willing to work with you from the very beginning. A third point is that it's absolutely crucial to have the organizational capacity within your own organization. Of course, you cannot do everything yourself, and you need to rely on partners. But there are a number of things that you need to have within the organization. And of course, that was when you were saying, and we were saying, that the HIB wasn't the humanitarian impact was an adventure for the ICRC. We learned as we go along, and we had to develop a number of issues around organizational capacity. This is fundamental. If you want to know more, or if you want me to speak more about it afterwards, happy to. Mm-hmm. A fourth point is that in doing something like a humanitarian impact bond, there are direct benefits and there are unexpected and indirect benefits, such as reputation, such as interest, such as developing new partnerships, and building the capacity to develop new financial instruments. Finally, I would just say that in terms of lessons learned, again, we started with the impact. We started with the instrument, and again, that is not the appropriate way to get going. There are, when it comes to new financing models, there's plenty. So you need to decide what is the best model that is suitable for whatever the challenge you set for yourself.
May I do one more lesson because I have to go for you? I think one of the other things that I think we were fortunate but still took a lot of work is the track record that ICRC had, and I wanted really to comment on it because I think impact bonds do provide a new way to rigorously and accurately measure outcomes and establish the value of those outcomes to outcome funders. And I think you're right pointing it out that that is still for outcome funders a new space, a relatively new space compared to traditional financing.
They're investing in it, and they want us to invest in it.
Exactly, but and I think there's now a trend towards, for example, traditionally to move more towards results-based funds, which will really build on the momentum of the impact bonds. But I wanted to say that I think one of the things that was key for us in also working with the ICRC was the long track record. I think that I'd love to hear then your view when I watch the video later about the long track record and the data that was available to build the model, the financial model that allowed investors to then assess the effectiveness of the ICRC as well as the variance, the risks in terms of the allow this to be a financial product that investors could look with an investment lens and decide their interest in it. And I think that still in the world of impact bonds is still quite rare to find someone of your track record in terms of number of countries, number of programs. And the process of the impact bond, which was a big part of what felt a long journey, was in setting up a data management system and then allowing you to invest in a system that allowed you to do that more systematically. I think the ICRC has always been great at what they do, but this process has set in place a system, and the first 3 years of the bond will allow the ICRC to do systematically what they've always done, which will allow then the efficiency gains that we expect.
So Maximilian, what do you think?
So I think I'd like to, I agree with what has been said and also the sense of excitement, but let me maybe provide some perspective. It's not correct that we don't have more resources to deal with the problem. If you look at, say, the budget of the ICRC in 2013 or of MSF, it was around 1.1 billion. Since then, ICRC has gone up to this year 2 billion. MSF is in the order of 1.5. You have the IRC as well, which has been under 1 billion. So more money is being channeled into humanitarian response, but unfortunately, until 2012 or so, we had always around 40 million refugees in these three categories, and now we're at over 65. So, in a sense, there have been more resources, but they're not enough to resolve the problem. And there are two logical solutions to that one needs to pursue in parallel. One is raise the efficiency of what you know works. This is what we did together with this specific financial instrument. And the second one is also to ask oneself, and then you're more in the world, I guess, of smart contracts and so on, what could be done fundamentally differently so as to come with new solutions that are radically more performing, that are not on the shelf. Maybe going back to number one first, I think it's been a very positive experience in the sense that, as was stated, you have organizations here who know what they're doing, who are committed to making it work. At the same time, if you think about the scaling of this, and clearly, you would want to apply this kind of logic to every strategic program in an organization that has a reputation, has organizational response capacity, has a balance sheet. So this is a kind of approach that could be replicated to other humanitarian organizations and indeed outside the world of humanitarian organizations, and it should. But I think then we also need to ask ourselves, what are some of the, in a sense, blockers that stand in the way of scale? One is certainly transaction cost. In fact, if you think about the amount of work that went into this, it's innovation, right? So it means people need to do things differently in all organizations involved. That's good, but if we counted the transaction cost, probably no one would have ever done it. So you have to bring down the transaction cost. It's extremely important. So documenting the learnings of the process.
Thank you, Serena. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Documenting the learnings of the process is absolutely essential. Just one sort of micro example on this. Juan mentioned that they started with the idea of a bond, and then we're looking for a program that would fit the instrument. I mean, technically, for example, as a regulated financial institution, we call this a program for humanitarian impact investment because it's not a bond; it's a private debt issuance. You cannot trade it, for example, on the secondary market. So these are the kinds of things where, if you start with the problem first, you can then think through, how do we need to structure it, and also what kind of terminology do we need to create. I mean, I would say the most interesting thing about social impact bonds is that most of them are not bonds. Right? It's very confusing. I've been involved in this space since 2005 when we co-created the idea of the contingent return model, which is really what it is. You compare a financial metric to a social metric. But then, for whatever reason, it became known as social impact bonds, and that's fine. But, financial institutions live in a regulated environment. Mis-selling would be a problem. So there are certain things, I think, where the non-profit sector and the financial sector need to collaborate early on upstream to create a terminology that works for the regulator, for the client, and for the organization. And there's a lot of joint work to do. I think a successful example such as this one helps, but we need more. The second one is scale. I mean, the logical consequence of the work performed at ICRC is now to say, we'd like to do a real bond next time, right? I mean, that's the logical thing. 26 million is great. It's the largest ever such transaction in the humanitarian space. You should probably do 100, 200, 500 million transaction, and then you could actually do a real bond, because then you can make sense to go prospectus and so on. So there's some work to be done on scale. And I think what we're working on, what's very important for all of us, is to think through what are the learnings from a process point of view that drive down transaction cost and enable scale in the next round. So you're building a marketplace over time. So that's, I would call this innovation in a box. We know the solution, it works, they have the experience, we just don't have a financial instrument. We need to create financial instruments across different asset classes. Now, the other part is probably as consequential if we are serious about getting a handle on the refugee crisis, humanitarian crisis in general. It is radically new forms of innovation. And then you brought up the discussion about smart contracts, blockchains, and so on. Then of course it's really important again to go back to first principles. Let's not be carried away by the hype. At the end of the day, we live in a world that's increasingly digitized. I mean, you have a smartphone here. In 30 years, the smartphone will be even smaller, and it will be probably under your skin somewhere in fact. But I mean, this is whether you like it or not, we're on a track of technological progress with miniaturization, biotech, and so on and so forth. The fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves now is, if you look at the needs in the humanitarian space, how do we leverage what we have today available in a smart way? Smart contracts, the idea was born in the early 90s. In fact, next year will be the 25th anniversary of the idea of smart contracts. But of course, when it was born in 1994, the technology wasn't there, right? Computing power, etc., etc. Now we can do things that we couldn't do before. What does this mean, in areas such as identity management, managing of processes such as food delivery, for example? What does this mean? How can we optimize further, bringing in digitization? This is completely standard now. In fact, I would say espoused by all large companies in their core businesses. We need a corresponding development in the humanitarian, in fact, in development space in general. We ask ourselves, how can we bring best-in-class technology, what we know about what works, to bear on these problems? And the question then is, of course, what's the role of different players? I mean, no one's going to do this alone. We think, the partnership with the ICRC is, as was mentioned, long-standing. It's more than 20 years old. Actually, not 20. I mean, since the 1860s. Well, time passes.
It is 155.
Yeah, that's also not so bad.
Which is not bad.
Right. It's serious stuff.
Yeah.
But what this means is there's trust. I mean, multiple generations of leaders in these two organizations have affirmed their trust in each other, their respective missions and complementarity. And this gives us, at the working level, so to speak, the license to really aspire to do things, to also share uncomfortable truths about what may be complicated to solve, and come up with solutions together. I'm absolutely convinced that this is the way forward. A very ambitious approach, a no-nonsense approach. Things that don't work, let's not do them. Makes no sense. But holistic, and asking ourselves, how can we bring in the power of innovation, technology? We know more about finance and technology. We know more about the humanitarian space. How do we bring that together and articulate these new instruments? And I would say excuse me if I call it PHI, because this is how we call it in legal documentation, of the PHI, of this instrument, is a very good example of what you can achieve if you're serious, if the partners are committed, and you address a real problem. So it was just the beginning of the journey, I would say. And I hope Juan agrees with me.
That's very interesting, and you have this vision of the future, and then you're talking about the path. So I would just ask you, what are the next steps after the humanitarian impact bond?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for the question. Then, pell-mell, there are a number of things that we need to do, and we're working on. We're exploring new financial instruments, based off a number of again specific objectives or what's. That's one. Second, we are also developing or studying more seriously. Okay, what are the challenges that would offer themselves, to be supported by new financial instruments? And again, I insist on this. When we're talking about these challenges, are challenges that are not solved or not at scale in the usual ways. Yeah, we're talking about challenges that need to be addressed by bringing others into the picture. We need to build our internal capacity, to be in a position to going forward to develop financial instruments with our partners. Again, we don't want to have all the capacity within the ICRC, but there's a number of things that we need to have. Within the house. We continue sharing our experience about the humanitarian impact bond, and at the same time learning. And we're also trying, to come up with a sort of strategy, which is a moving thing, because we learn every day. But a bit of a strategy around what are new financial instruments, why do we mean by that, and where do we want to put, our eggs in which baskets.
Thank you, Juan. And Maximilian, you were talking about these new forms of innovation and the way that we can really bring the power of innovation and technology, and how we can really take this opportunity. What are your next steps in this regard?
So, first of all, we seek to support the ICRC on this journey. So this is our commitment is unwavering and maybe even increasing after the successful experience. What this means in practice with respect to this is precisely, to jointly analyze what are issues that naturally lend themselves to being just with new financial instruments. And let's not forget, when we talk about efficiency improvements, you have to have data, you have to have a track record. You have a track record in numerous programs. When you talk about, say, new out-of-the-box solutions, it's a bit more complicated, and maybe not everything is to be done inside an ICRC, but maybe there are other things that can be done, say, in the ecosystem, nuclear ecosystem, that makes sense. It's all about mapping and then finding solutions. The other point I'd like to make is, we think that this approach of saying, let's have us as a financial institution with deep expertise in finance work with a leader in a specific field that covers one or several of the Sustainable Development Goals, requires a commitment to partnership. Now we have that, it's historically developed with ICRC, it's there, but we're expanding this model. For example, maybe you've seen that this week we announced in Davos a new strategic partnership with the Global Pfund, where over the next 5 years we will, in a sense, be doing a bit the same thing. We will be looking at what are issues, what can financial instruments contribute, and then what kinds of instruments can we launch that make sense. And they may be different kinds of asset classes. Here we have one example. So again, let's not make the Peter Drucker mistake to say everything is going to be a social impact. No, absolutely not. Not everything is going to be a social impact bond. It will be one of the solutions on the shelf, and it depends on what you're trying to do. So those are two things. The advice that we would like to provide, and what we think is important as success criteria, the advantage that you have as a leader in your field, in the humanitarian spaces, you have a lot of partnerships around you. And to the extent I think the ICRC has done this very well with the corporate support group, it makes a lot of sense to also access industry, real economy, industry expertise on technology, on supply chain, logistics, on a variety of things that can then help to formulate solutions where we can help structure on the financing end. Because we're not going to be ever, it's not our business basically, we will not be the best in understanding how you move something from A to B at the lowest cost. Maybe you should talk to Coca-Cola, I don't know. So it's this idea of partnership where different parties contribute competences. And whenever we talk about mobilizing financial resources, inevitably the financial sector has to be at the table at some point. The proposition here is to say, let's do it upstream to conceptualize what we want to do, rather than downstream. Say, someone wants to launch the XYZ and then shop for a bank. That's just a suboptimal way of doing it. And so that's why we're advocating strategic partnerships in that space.
Strategic partnerships, very, very interesting. So on the short run, Who would
Maybe
be...
can I maybe just come in also, and again, we're trying to figure this out. I mean, this is a new territory for us in many ways. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to map out, okay, again, what do we mean by new financial instruments? And I would see at this point three, in any case, two main buckets and perhaps a third. The first bucket is about innovative financing mechanisms. Okay, like impact bonds, like advanced market commitments, like obligations, real bonds, etc. Yeah? We have a big number of them in this first bucket. The second bucket for me would be about contributing to enabling access to financial services for the people affected by conflict in the places where we work. Access to bank accounts, to microinsurance, to microcredit, and even perhaps access to basic services through financial services. That in my mind is a very important second bucket, and it's more of if the first one is more top down in a way, the second is more about bottom up, starting with the people, and encourage and facilitating access to financial services. And in between, there's something else that is a bit of a mixed bag, but among other things, it can include so-called venture or impact philanthropy that can actually help the other two buckets. And in the humanitarian impact bond, we also have an example, among others, with the Kaiser Foundation, who came in as an outcome funder. In a way, that would be part to my mind of that second. And in addition, talking about access to financial services for the underbanked in difficult places, this can also be packaged as financial instrument. So again, there's a wide variety up there. So you don't need to focus on the instrument per se. Focus first on the problem, and then you can choose the.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe we're gonna finish the session. So yes, definitely. So please, if you can come up with a sentence of conclusion, each of you.
So just to build on what Juan said, I fully agree that it's an ecosystem view. We view the organization here, ICRC, as in a sense a leader in its ecosystem. Some of the innovative finance instruments will direct resources to activities of ICRC. Some of such instruments actually will direct resources to other players in the system, so that jointly they can create a greater impact. So when you think about taking innovative financing to the next level in the humanitarian space, this ecosystem perspective is absolutely critical. And secondly, then, as mentioned before, the idea of saying let's create truly investable instruments at scale. Maybe you cannot do it immediately for every asset class in the first round, but that has to be the vision. So it has to, transaction cost has to be monitored. It has to make sense from a distribution perspective. The impact needs to be demonstrable. You need to look systematically across asset classes as a function of problems you've identified. So in effect, it is a fairly strategic approach that is very exciting because, again, what does the other scenario look like? If we don't succeed, if you look at the hockey stick of growth of needs, our world will be in pretty bad shape. So I think it's simply not reasonable as we as professionals we don't do our part. And I think that's the opportunity, and future generations will judge us. But the contributions we made, so let's make a positive one.
Thank you, Maximilian.
Yeah.
Juan,
and I would say that from my perspective, to sum it up in a few words, I think the challenge for us is to ensure that we help enable and bring new sources of capital, whether private or institutional, and new partners into humanitarian settings. That is the challenge. Again, the needs are huge. We cannot do it alone. We need more companies, more institutions investing in these issues because it's relevant for them and because there is a business model for it.
Thank you very much, Maximilian and Juan, for coming over today at the Sustainable Impact Hub and talk about innovative finance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.